Hello, my name is Teresa and this is week 4 of my 100 days of making comics. This week I have been developing the style for the comic I'm making, and I'm gonna share with you my method for developing style and finding the right style for your comic. I hope you enjoy it. So in this video I'm gonna talk about 3 things. First of all, my method to developing a style. Secondly, tips on style development in general. And lastly, I'm going to talk about style in comics. Okay, so let's start with my method, which anyone can follow very easily to create a style for a comic. What I do first, the first step, is to create a base drawing, a sort of a skeleton that you can draw over to repeat the same illustration in different styles. And you can see that in the video I am doing this in a sort of blue color, and then I'm going to use that to draw over with the different iterations of the style. So step 1, create a dummy basic base drawing that you can replicate a lot of times and draw over. The reason why I do this is because we need to separate style from skill. A lot of the times people look at their drawings and say, oh, I don't like it, so I'm going to change the style. And the problem is not the style, the problem is the level of skill. It's not the level of skill that produces drawings that they can be proud of. It's not what they want to see in the page. But it's not a question of style, it's a question of skill. So maybe their perspective is off, or maybe their anatomy is all over the place, or maybe the composition is terrible, but it's nothing to do with style. Style is something completely separate from skill. And in fact, if you see a very accomplished master, a person that illustrates or paints or draws comics at a very masterful level, regardless of your stylistic preferences, you can always see it and think, this is amazing. I wish I could do this. Because when you reach that level of skill, style really doesn't matter. Style is just a aesthetic preference. Of course, a style can be more than an aesthetic preference, and it can play a role in the narration of the story and the type of feeling that you want for your story. But we'll talk about that later in the video. But right now, let's just think about style as the type of aesthetic that you're going for in your comic. And in that sense, again, it's important to separate style from skill. So prepare that base drawing and start drawing on top of that over and over and over to test the style without mixing it with the skill involved in the drawing. So now you have your dummy drawing, and now it's time to start your style exploration and your style experimentation. The first thing you need to do is you need to draw with your natural style, which means you're just going to draw with whatever tool was selected or whatever you have at hand. In this case, I'm drawing with the preset brush, or the dip pen, I think it was. And I'm just drawing in whichever way it comes out, without thinking, without anything. Just do it with the preset tools or the tools that you have at hand. Once you've done that, you have your baseline. This is where you're departing from. And now you look at it and you ask yourself one simple question. Is this gonna work for my comic? Is this in line with the vision I have for my comic? And does this fit my story? And if the answer is yes, then you would have to go into refining it. And if the answer is no, you would have to go into the process of changing the style. And I'm going to talk about those 2 things, changing and refining. The first one, changing your style, is a very lengthy process because we all have a way in which we draw naturally. Is what some people call natural style. Personally, I think this natural style comes a lot from the way we perceive reality and the way we think about shapes and the way we think about drawing in general. So it has to do with your mindset and the way you think. So changing your style requires changing your mind a lot and thinking in different ways. So it's a very lengthy process, and it's a very, at times, sort of introspective process. You have to realize why you draw the way you draw and how you can think differently to get different results. Because if, for example, in your style, everything is really edgy and you want it to be softer and rounder, maybe it's because you are interpreting reality as if it were contained in squares or triangles. And that's the shapes you tend to see and you tend to use to build your structures. Whereas a person that interprets reality, seeing circles everywhere, would have a different style. Personally, I tend to see a lot of squares. I tend to think a lot in cubes and squares, and circles and triangles are not really... I mean, if it's clearly a circle or a triangle, it will be, but I tend more towards this thinking about things in squares and cubes. And that, I think, defines a lot the type of shapes that I create. And you can see it in my drawings. Well, a lot of the times I'm creating shapes that are basically deformed squares in some way. And of course I have to make a conscious effort to create round shapes. And that was a conscious act of style manipulation that I made at a point, because I wanted rounder shapes, because I wanted to be cuter. But I have a natural tendency towards analyzing reality in terms of squares. And that defined a lot of my style for a long time. And I didn't understand why. And then I realized, oh, I'm doing all these straight lines, and that's why it looks different to how I want it to look. So yeah, I'm a square and I want it to be a circle, and I realized and I made certain changes. But at the end of the day, if I wanted to be like someone like Hayao Miyazaki that has a lot of round shapes, I don't think I could do that, because it would be a constant fight against myself and the way my brain looks at things. And I don't think it would be worth my while. So I think it's okay to make some changes if you want to get a certain effect. Like in my case, I want to make things cuter because they're children, so I go to rounder shapes. But if, like me, you have a tendency for squares, embrace it. Embrace it. You're a square, and it's okay. Some people are squares, some people are triangles, some people are circles. Some people don't even perceive shapes, they perceive volumes and textures, and it's okay. You can work with it and make it work for you. And that's where unique, beautiful, personal styles come from. It's from embracing what you naturally have in yourself and developing it to a place where it's good. So do not run away from your natural style, but if you want, you can make some changes to it, but I wouldn't recommend trying to change it completely. But if you want to change it, what you need to do is two things. You can copy your favorite artists and just realize in which ways they create those shapes that you would never think of. And the second is to draw from reality and realize what deformations you're making to reality, because that will be a reflection of the way you naturally think about things. Because we all deform reality when we draw it. We all start from a shape, and it's super interesting to look at that, because every time I draw like a human face, I create a square, and someone right next to me could be sitting in this room drawing a circle for the face, which makes a lot of sense, I suppose, but not for me. I see a square, I draw a square. So yeah, I'm a square and I'm proud of it. But when I need round shapes to make things cuter, I do have to make a conscious effort and make that happen. And of course, all this time I've been talking about shapes because I'm obsessed with shapes, and that defines a lot my style too. But you can also apply this logic to line quality, line weight, line thickness. You can also apply it to coloring style, shading. Anything that conforms a visual style can be analyzed and changed. The second part of this is developing your style rather than changing it. And I'm gonna make a bold claim here that an underdeveloped style always looks rubbish. And that's probably not true in every occasion, but generally it tends to be. What makes a style attractive is the fact that it has been distilled and refined to its core essence and to what makes it good. And all the bad elements have been taken away and all the good elements have been enhanced. And this is mainly what you can see in the video right now, where I am not changing the style anymore. What I'm doing is I'm refining it. So I'm making notes on, change the line quality, or change the shapes, or make them more graphic. And I'm just tweaking different elements until I find something that I really like. The decisions that I'm making at this point have to do a lot with my influences and what I'm looking for and what I personally prefer to see in a comic. There's no right and wrong when it comes to developing your style. You have to look at your own sensibilities and what you prefer to see on the page and make those decisions little by little, changing elements like line, shape, noise. For example, at one point in this video you will see like I'm considering whether to add noise, because I am a big Robert Crumb fan, but I don't think I want noise in my drawings because it just doesn't look right with what I'm doing with everything else. So yeah, experiment, have fun, reference your artistic heroes, and keep developing it until you see something that will work with the comic. And that's just simply developing your natural style. In short, the way I see it, developing your natural style and making conscious choices to change it is similar to the difference between refining your personality and your innate character. So, you know, all babies are born with a certain character. It's not quite a personality because they're not developed enough, but they do have a character more. Some of them are calmer, some of them are more nervous, some of them are more observant, some of them are more absent-minded. You know, like you can see in babies that they do have an innate character that they bring with themselves into the world. But the way that character develops into a personality, that's a complete different thing. So my idea here is what you have in your head, the way you perceive the world, the way your natural style comes out into the page is your character. And developing your style is the same as developing a personality. If you think that you are too edgy, which is funny because sometimes I think, oh, maybe I'm too edgy, I should be kinder. And in the same way in my drawings I go, there are too many edges, maybe I should make them softer and rounder. So it's those little choices that you make, and then through repetition and habit you change them. But you can never change what's underneath, which is your essence, your character, your natural style. So whichever road you decide to choose, whether it is to change your style or develop it at this point, I would urge you to do one thing, and this is my first general tip. I would urge you to keep your eyes open. When we look at the world, we observe things in a particular way. So, for example, when I'm in the metro and I'm looking at how clothes fold, I look at the outlines, I look at the shapes, and this determines very much the way in which I will later draw that jacket when I try to reproduce it in a page from memory. So keep your eyes open and try to imagine how would you translate that into a page? What shapes, what bits can you translate and use? I do this a lot when I am commuting. I look at people and I look for shapes. And I've heard of people saying this, people that paint, that they look at light, the way light hits objects and things. If I want to improve my painting, I should probably start looking at that. But I have this mind where I'm always looking for shapes, and that's why I'm not such a great painter. So if I want to improve my painting, I have to keep my eyes open for things that will improve my painting. So if you're having some style development problems, start to go out into the world with eyes that will see the things that you need later on in the page. So do you need to change your color? Well, open your eyes, look at colors. If you want to improve the way you draw hair, open your eyes, look at people's hair. Okay, so that's all I have to say about style development and style change. And now I'm going to talk about style in comics in particular. Now, I like to create this analogy. I think about comics as illustration as two forms of art that share the same principles, but they don't share the same objectives. The same happens with cinema and photography. A film is essentially a lot of photographs put together so that they create the illusion of motion. And in the same way, a comic is a number of illustrations placed in a page in a specific composition. They create a story. Comics and cinema are narrative mediums. They aim to narrate something, they aim to tell stories. And this is not always the case, again, because there are exceptions to everything. You can find comics that are not narrative, and you can find films that are like a person reading the newspaper for 5 minutes. You know, those experimental comics and films exist. But in general terms, if you are preparing to make a comic, you probably have a story. And that story is more important than the quality of the illustration or the beauty of the illustration. In the same way that in cinema, photography is an element that makes a film more enjoyable, but is not the main thing to worry about. You can see directors such as Wes Anderson, whose photography direction is so tight, and I bet you could pause a Wes Anderson film at any point and find a beautiful shot. But his emphasis on photography affects the feeling of his films. And his films have a pace and an atmosphere and a general style that is affected by this emphasis on photography. This is a stylistic choice in itself. The emphasis on photography is a stylistic choice, in the same way that you, as a comic artist, could have a strong emphasis on the illustration quality or amount of detail. And that is a stylistic choice. A comic that is illustrated painstakingly well is not necessarily a better comic than a stick figure comic. You need to think about one thing and one thing only when you choose the style of your comic, and that is, what is it that I'm trying to convey? The style of the illustration will affect the way in which your comic is perceived and read, and so choose a style of illustration that will create the atmosphere and the feeling that is right for your story. Don't create illustrations to impress people, because they might be very impressed and at the same time completely distracted from the story. So if an impressive style is what goes with the story because you're creating this epic action story, then go for it. But don't create an epic action, dynamic, amazing style if you are creating a comic about how you broke up with your boyfriend over the summer, because maybe it'll be a fun juxtaposition, but maybe not the best choice in terms of getting the reader to connect emotionally with the characters. And that's it. Okay, this is all I have to say about style exploration and style development. Next week I will be talking about a setting design, so designing the spaces in which your comic takes place, and I have a specific technique that I took from a Tumblr post, I think it was, that has worked wonders, especially for me, because I have issues with consistency. Objects tend to move around in my comics a lot. It's like, wasn't there a television there? Now that's a table with some flowers. I was like, oh my. Okay, so I'll be talking about that next week, set dressing. And now on to the vloggy bit, where I talk about my week. So week 4 has gone alright. I was still a little bit ill, but I was fine in the end. And this is that exploration thing, man. I'm trying to look for something that is gonna challenge me to create clean digital illustrations, because the whole thing that I'm doing during this challenge is that I'm trying to do 100% digital comic. The reason why I'm doing it 100% digitally is because I have never done it and I wanted to challenge myself. For some reason I have this tendency to, whenever I'm put in a position where I have to do something and nobody else can be affected by it, I tend to try and do the most difficult thing I could possibly do. I used to do this all the time at universities, like, I'm gonna choose my subjects for next semester, and you had these free choice subjects, and I would choose like, people were choosing like astronomy for beginners or something, and I would choose like this third year philosophy subject about epistemology. And I don't know why I do that all the time, but I do. It's like I like to challenge myself to see if I can improve. Same happens with like how I chose to do maths up to high school level. Like I did my access to university with maths, even though like we had a report created for us by some psychologist, and it said this child needs to do humanities because she's not great with numbers. And I was like, well, I'll do maths, because if I'm bad at maths and I keep doing maths, I'll get good at it. And this is the thing, I'm not very good at digital illustration. I only have had my drawing tablet for about, I don't know, a year? Yeah, I think it's been a year more or less, and I'm not I don't know, I'm not entirely comfortable, especially sketching. There's something about sketching that is just weird in digital, and I can't get used to it. But I think it's a question of practice, and if I just stick to it, especially if I'm trying to do something really clean and really professional looking using only digital, then I think I'm gonna make like big strides towards getting good at illustrating digitally. And that's what I've been doing, is like, what can I do with my style that is good for the story and at the same time a massive challenge? And I think simple graphic shapes that are like precise with the digital tools would be my most challenging thing. And in general, I think getting like precise, clean lines is one of the most difficult things. I can create expressive lines, but precision drawings, like technical drawing and stuff like that, is like I even struggle using rulers. There's something about me that just creates lines that have a mind of their own. And of course I can create shapes that look good, but you know, those clean lines, no, that's not what I can do. And also it was interesting to just think about style. When I was preparing the topic, I was listening to a number of videos where people talk about how they develop their style, and I saw a lot of common places. But I think one of the most difficult things is when you're starting out and you just hate it. Because I remember when I started drawing, I started quite late. I started when I was, I think, 17 more or less. And I remember looking at my drawings and thinking, my style is rubbish. And this is why I mentioned that in the talk I gave earlier, is because I couldn't separate style from skill. And I thought, my style is so ugly. And it's like, it's not my style. It's like, you don't know how to draw, so it looks ugly. That's what's going on there. And I got so obsessed, I remember, about developing a style, and I just went to my biggest influences, which are like Disney and French Belgian comics like Asterix and Obelix and Tintin and all these things. And what they all have in common is that they have these really clear, clean lines, and that's like the one thing I really struggle with. I can create very easily like sketchy stuff that is very expressive, but ask me to put one line to condense that idea, and you know, I find that very, very difficult. So yeah, I'm trying to be you know, Hergé or whatever you call it, the author of Tintin, and it goes completely against my nature. So that's been interesting. And well, that's all I have to say about that, and I hope you guys are having a good week. I hope everyone is getting on with their 100 days, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.